The last thing I expected on my 30th work anniversary was to be handed a pink slip right as the smell of burnt coffee hit me, and the office's fluorescent lights flickered like they knew. I'm Cal 58, a mechanic who always kept my old company pen clipped to my shirt pocket even that day. Ever had success come disguised as failure? Tell me your moment, I'm listening. The first thing I heard as I stepped into the reception wasn't the clink of glasses or the soft shuffle of well-heeled guests. It wasn't the jazz band either, though their notes floated politely through the air, trying their best to smooth over any rough edges of the evening. No, what sliced clean through that music was my mother's voice, loud enough for the chandelier crystals to hum with it. "You're just a mechanic." For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe she was talking about someone else, though I doubted there were many grease-stained souls in this room of starched collars and polished boots. But the way heads turned, the way a smirk twitched at the edge of my cousin's mouth confirmed it. No mistake. The words landed like a slap in front of Wyatt's in-laws, Jolene's college friends, the city councilman they'd invited. I paused just inside the doorway, taking in the room the oil paintings of ranch scenes, the mounted longhorn skulls, meant to whisper of Texas pride and old money. My boots felt heavy on the polished floor, and I realized I'd scuffed them on the way in. The faint trace of engine oil I hadn't noticed in the truck now seemed to coat my fingertips. My collar, maybe my whole being. At the back near the bourbon table, Edsel Maddox stood. His glass remained untouched, his gaze steady on me. The kind of look that didn't demand or judge, just waited. I felt it anchor me for a beat before the tide of whispers lapped up again. I exhaled through my nose, slow, measured. Not here, not tonight. Wyatt deserved better than a scene. I reminded myself of that with every step toward my assigned table tucked away near the swinging doors to the kitchen. I passed clusters of guests who offered polite nods or didn't look at all. The ones who did glance my way did so quickly, like checking if I had a stain on my shirt or a tear in my jacket. The table was set with crisp linens, though the cloth at my seat bore a faint coffee ring that hadn't been scrubbed out completely. The napkin sat folded perfectly. By instinct, I picked it up, unfolded, refolded, smoothed its edge. A quiet task to keep my hands from curling into fists. Water beads rolled down the untouched glass in front of me, leaving trails that shimmered in the soft light. I watched them as if their slow descent might buy me time, might let me gather what little composure I still owned. My fingers, almost on their own, drifted to the inside pocket of my jacket, brushing against the worn leather case that held my service badge. Small, faded. The stitching frayed at the corners, but solid. Vernice's voice rang out again, carrying just enough to fill the space around her without seeming impolite. To Wyatt, who overcame the odds despite certain handicaps in his family, the burn crept up my neck. I felt the room pause, not silent, but the kind of hush where forks hovered above plates, where glasses froze midair. Jolene's father shifted in his seat, glancing at me, then away. Wyatt didn't look at me at all, his eyes fixed somewhere just over my head, his jaw tight, his hand rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did when nerves took hold. I took a sip of water. It tasted of nothing, but the coolness steadied me. Across the room, Edsel moved. Not much, just enough to set his glass down with a soft clink, his stance changing from casual guest to something more deliberate. A server brushed past the tray of flutes on his shoulder, wobbling slightly as he navigated the crowded space. The scent of roasted pork mingled with the faint sweetness of the centerpieces. White roses tinged pink at the edges. I caught it all in the inhale, grounding myself in the physical, in the small. I looked at Wyatt then. Really looked. My boy no longer a boy. His suit sharp, his tie a little crooked the way his mother would have fussed over if she'd been here. The shine in his eyes wasn't joy, not entirely. I saw it the flicker of shame of wishing I'd vanished into the walls or never shown up at all. I folded the napkin again slower this time, creasing it with care. My badge case felt warm beneath my fingers now, as if the leather had soaked up my pulse. I thought of the nights under desert stars, the heat of the engine under my hands, the hum of the jet before takeoff. Those were the moments no one here saw. No one but Edsel, perhaps. The jazz band tried to pick up the mood, the saxophone sliding into a softer tune, hopeful maybe. But the damage was done. The comment hung in the air, a shadow across the celebration. I stayed seated, kept my smile soft but tight. I wouldn't give Vernice the satisfaction of seeing me rise in protest. Edsel's glass rested on the table now. He straightened shoulders back, his gaze meeting mine across the distance. The space between us seemed to shrink under the weight of what was unspoken. He was about to move. I could feel it as sure as the ground under my boots. And in that breath between insult and whatever came next, I let my hand fall from the badge. My son's wedding wasn't the place for old battles, but maybe, just maybe, it was the place for truths to find their voice. The air smelled of roses and roasted pork, but I tasted none of it as I sat at my corner table, the one so close to the swinging kitchen doors. I could feel the breeze each time they flapped open. The scent of dish soap and steam mingled with the perfume of the centerpieces, making it harder to focus on anything but the hollow in my chest. The room had dimmed for dinner candlelight flickering against polished silverware. Conversation hummed around me, a low, polite drone, punctuated by the occasional sharp laugh. From the head table, the glow of the slideshow played across Wyatt's face, casting him alternately in gold and shadow. My hand drifted to the badge inside my coat. I didn't pull it out, no need to parade that here, but the weight of it, the worn leather case, grounded me. A reminder of who I was before this room, before these looks, before my mother's voice carved me down to size. A server approached, offering wine. I shook my head, asked for water. The glass was cool against my palm, condensation trailing down my fingers. As I took a sip, the murmur of voices rose and fell like the tide, and I caught words not meant for me. Blue collar, poor match, shame, really. I kept my eyes on the table, the linen napkin folded with care, now creased and recreased by my restless hands. The voices weren't cruel, not openly, but the kind of dismissive tone that stung sharper for pretending kindness. Behind my closed mouth, I tasted desert heat, jet fuel, the grit of sand against my teeth. Nights under an unrelenting sky, my hands deep in engines that had to work, had to carry men home. I remembered the hiss of hydraulics, the hum of systems springing to life because I'd made them right, the work that kept them flying, that kept them breathing, work no one here would ever see or think to ask about. When I finally raised my gaze, it found Edsel's across the room. He was still there, still watching. A small nod, barely more than a tilt of his head, but enough. A quiet acknowledgement, a reminder that at least one person here saw more than grease and calluses. The tray wobbled as a young server passed by, catching the edge of a chair. His face flushed as he steadied it, flutes of champagne trembling, but not toppling. I offered a small wry smile that he didn't see, already focused on his next task. Vernice's voice floated over the clatter of cutlery. Bless his heart, always so helpful, she said loud enough that the nearest tables heard. The words dripped sweet, but the sting was clear. A server turned at that, his brow knit in confusion. His eyes flicked to me, then the tray in his hands. "Sir," he asked, offering the tray's edge as if I'd reached for it. For a moment, I didn't correct him. The weight of the tray, the feel of its balance was familiar, in a way that surprised me. I let my palm hover there, not grasping it, just remembering. Then I shook my head gentle, let the moment pass. The young man flushed deeper, mumbled an apology, and hurried on. I breathed deep, the air thick with roasted meat wax, the faint tang of white wine. My chair creaked as I shifted the sound, lost in the swell of a new song from the band. I watched the slideshow for a moment. Wyatt as a baby, all chubby cheeks and toothless grin. Wyatt in Little League in a scout uniform too big for his frame. Wyatt at graduation cap, tilted Jolene by his side. No trace of me in the pictures. Not one. I felt the ache of that absence, not because I needed to be seen, but because he did. The clatter of silverware brought me back. I set down my glass, its surface now damp with sweat from my grip. The need for air pulled at me stronger than the weight of the moment. I rose slowly, the chair's legs scraping the floor just enough to mark my passing. Outside, the night air wrapped cool around me, clearing my head. My phone was warm in my hand screen, lighting my face in the dark. My thumb hovered over Amos's name, the urge to hear a steady voice, almost too much to resist. But I didn't press the call. Not yet. Instead, I stood there a while longer listening to the muffled sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft thump of the bass from inside. The badge pressed against my chest, unseen but steady. The first thing I heard when I pressed the phone to my ear was Amos's voice, low and steady, like it always had been. "Brother," he said, and in that single word was more comfort than I'd felt all evening. "I was wondering when you'd call." I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. The night air, cool against my face, scented faintly with honeysuckle from somewhere along the fence line. The church parking lot stretched quiet around me. The reception hall's lights still glowing in the distance, like a reminder of the storm I'd stepped out of. "I didn't want to bother you," I said, voice softer than I meant it to be. "You're not a bother," Amos replied. No hesitation. The hum of his words filled the space between us, bringing with it the rush of old memories, the sting of sand in my eyes, the burn of sun on my neck, the roar of jet engines coming to life at dawn. Those mornings when it was just us in the sky, when the weight of the world felt simpler, clearer. I leaned against the side of my truck, felt the warmth of the metal where the engine had cooled only part way. The night breeze stirred, carrying with it the quiet of the lot, the faint sound of music still drifting from the hall. "You fixed more than jets out there," Amos said, his voice a tether pulling me back to myself. "You kept us flying. Don't let tonight make you forget that." My hand went to the door handle, then slipped inside the cab. The familiar creak of the seat as I leaned over, digging beneath the stack of papers, and the stray ball cap fingers, closing around the cracked leather folder I hadn't opened in years. The texture rough under my thumb, the seam at one corner starting to give way. I eased it open, the faint whiff of oil and old paper rising up like a ghost. Inside were the commendations, the notes, the pieces of my story. No one at that reception would ever see. A certificate from the base commander, edges curled with age. A yellowed letter from a pilot's wife, thanking me for bringing her husband home. But it was the note in the middle that I lingered on, a scrap of paper folded, small ink smudged at one edge. A thank you from a man I'd barely known outside the cockpit. His words plain but heavy. "You didn't just fix the jet. You saved my skin. I owe you." I read it twice, maybe 3 times, the weight of it settling into my chest. The sounds of the reception seemed farther now. The laughter and music muted by distance and memory. The badge was next pulled from my coat pocket where it had stayed close all night. I held it up to the moonlight, its edge catching just enough to gleam. And there it was, a scratch I'd never noticed before, running along the bottom curve. Not deep, but there. A mark I must have earned along the way, like all the others I carried unseen. I stood there for a long minute, the breeze teasing at the edges of the papers in my hand, the hum of Amos's words still in my ear, even though the call had ended. Then I straightened, tucking the folder under my arm, the badge back safe in my pocket. I turned toward the hall, the glow of its windows a beacon, now not a threat. My boots crunched softly on the gravel as I took the first steps back, resolve settling in my bones like an old friend returned. It started with Edsel's voice, low, steady cutting clean through the murmurs, and the clink of cutlery like a blade honed on truth. That man fixed my jet in combat. The room froze. You could feel it, like the air got thicker all of a sudden. Even the jazz band faltered mid-note, the sax player pulling the reed from his lips, eyes darting toward the unexpected spotlight. It wasn't the kind of moment anyone here had planned for. I didn't move, not at first. The weight of Edsel's words hung between us, heavier than the chandelier above, brighter than any toast or speech that had come before. My mother's glass hovered near her lips, hand-stiff knuckles pale against the crystal stem. Wyatt's head turned, eyes wide, searching my face like he was seeing it fresh. Edsel took a step forward, the subtle creak of his boots on the polished floor, the only sound beside the hush. His hand came to rest on my shoulder. Not heavy, just firm enough to remind me I wasn't alone in this room, full of sideways glances and whispered judgments. He kept me flying when it mattered most. Edsel said, his voice filling the space, with no need for a microphone, no need for permission. Didn't ask for credit, didn't wait for applause. Just did the work that saved my life, more than once. Around us, chairs shifted. The tension cracked as if the room had to move to let the truth settle in. A woman near the front dabbed at her eyes with the corner of her napkin. A man at a side table straightened his tie gaze, dropping as if ashamed not to have known. I didn't say a word. There was no need. Edsel's voice carried the weight I'd tried to shoulder in silence all these years. Vernice tried to recover. Well, she said, voice brittle but reaching for charm, we all have our parts to play. Leland's always been so hands-on. A few polite chuckles floated up the kind born more of habit than humor, but the tide was shifting. The first smattering of applause started at the edge of the room, tentative as if folks weren't sure if it was allowed. Then another joined, and another, uneven at first, then building, filling the hall with the rhythm of recognition. I felt Edsel squeeze my shoulder once before letting his hand fall. He didn't need to say more. The floor was mine now in a way it had never been, and the question hung there, what would I do with it? My phone buzzed in my pocket, the vibration soft against the fabric of my coat. I slipped it free, thumb brushing the cracked edge of the screen. Amos. The floor is yours now, what will you build on it? The applause still echoed as I glanced toward my mother. Her smile was tight, her grip on the wineglass tight enough that I wondered if the stem might snap. The band hesitated, then eased back in, filling the space with a tune that felt too bright, too eager to cover what had just happened. The weight of the leather folder beneath my arm steadied me, its cracked spine warm where it touched my side. I looked around at the faces, some embarrassed, some relieved, some just curious at the shift, and I breathed in the air sharp with candle wax, wine, and something else possibility. Wouldn't it be nice to see some real memories? A voice said, just loud enough to carry over the hum of the crowd. I didn't see who spoke, but the glance they threw at the projector was enough. The comment wasn't cruel, not exactly, but it was the kind that lingered in the air, waiting for someone to either rise to it or shrink from it. I didn't rise or shrink. I acted. The reception hall was dim now, the kind of soft lighting meant to flatter and hush at the same time. Candlelight flickered against the rims of glasses, casting small halos on linen tablecloths. The hum of the projector started up again, filling the space with a mechanical promise that something new was about to appear. I slipped my phone from my pocket, thumb steady, despite the thrum of adrenaline in my veins. The cracked leather folder rested under my arm, its weight familiar, comforting. My fingers moved without hurry, selecting the images that told my story in a way words never could. A simple airdrop request to the AV operator, a young man with a headset, and the look of someone ready to follow orders as long as it meant no trouble. His eyes met mine, and I nodded once. That was all it took. The screen flickered, the bright white of a fresh slide cutting through the dim. Then came the first image, me 25 years younger, standing with my squad in front of a jet dust, hanging in the air like a veil. My uniform wrinkled from hours in the heat, my smile small but real. The kind of moment no one in that hall had ever imagined for me. The murmurs quieted, forks lowered, even the band stilled the sax player, letting the reed rest against his chin. Edsel's voice rose, not loud, but firm enough that it didn't need to be. That was Kandahar. That man kept us flying. Another slide, a night shot, the jet's silhouette against a rising moon, my hands visible on the fuselage, grease-stained and sure. Another, a candid me crouched beside a landing gear, tools spread out, the exhaustion plain on my face. But so was the resolve. I heard the shift before I saw it, the way the room leaned forward, as if trying to see clearer. A guest near the middle clapped once, tentative, like testing if it was permitted. Then another joined, and another, the applause spreading, uneven but sincere. The sound filled the hall, not the polite clatter of cocktail hour, but something more honest. I stayed seated, let the images and the moment do the speaking. There was no need to add my voice to what was already louder than pride or shame. Vernice's laugh broke through, high and brittle. "You know Leland," she said, voice pitched too bright, always the storyteller. But it didn't land. The guests weren't looking at her anymore. Their attention stayed on the screen, on the man they hadn't seen, or perhaps hadn't chosen to see until now. The hum of the projector filled the space between the claps. The flicker of slides casting memories across the walls, across faces that now looked at me differently. I felt the badge in my pocket shift, catching a stray glint of light. And for once, I didn't adjust it. Let it shine. He always did like to play hero for attention. Vernice's voice sliced through the room, brittle and sharp like a glass dropped onto stone. The applause faltered, caught midair like hands weren't sure whether to keep clapping or fold back into laps. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the hum of the lights and the faint drip of wine from someone's glass tipping just a little too far. Her words didn't just land, they echoed. I felt the weight of them hit not my ears, but my chest, the spot where pride and restraint had been holding hands all evening. I looked at her, really looked. Her smile, strained at the corners, now stretched too tight over the bones of pretense. The mask she wore so well was slipping, and she seemed to know it. And before I could do a thing, Wyatt stood. The chair legs scraped across the hardwood floor, a sound that seemed to tear the hush wide open. His face was pale, but his eyes, clear jaw set. His steps toward me weren't hurried or hesitant, just certain. When he reached my side, he rested a hand on my shoulder, the weight of it grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. He didn't look at his grandmother. He didn't need to. His gaze swept the room, instead, inviting them to hear him, not her. He was never after attention, Wyatt said, his voice steady, caring in that way only sincerity does. Just respect. And maybe if we'd given him that sooner, he wouldn't have had to remind us tonight. The guests shifted, their discomfort palpable but changing shape, less about the awkwardness of the moment, more about the mirror Wyatt had just held up. Then came Edsel. He rose slow, unhurried, as if time had waited for him to speak. Men like him don't ask for applause, Edsel said, his voice calm but filling the space. They earn it, and he earned it every day in places most of us can't begin to imagine. Vernice tried. You could see it in the twitch of her lips, the way her fingers fumbled with the stem of her glass. But the mask had cracked too wide now. The wine sloshed as she brought the glass to her mouth, but she missed the mark slightly, the red spilling in a thin ribbon down the front of her blouse, before blooming on the white tablecloth beneath. The room saw it. Everyone saw it, but no one said a word. The silence spoke plenty. Then, like a rain starting slow, the clapping came back. This time, whole. No polite pattering, no uncertain glances to check if it was proper. Just applause, the kind that rises because it can't be held back, because truth had finally been named in a place where it had long been absent. And I stood in it, not shrinking, not waving it off, letting it be, letting it belong to the moment, not just to me. The badge in my pocket felt solid now, not like a secret or a burden, but like the truth finally laid bare. My phone buzzed then. A small vibration, almost easy to miss beneath the sound of hands meeting hands. I glanced down, thumb brushing the cracked corner of the screen. Edsel's name. Subject long overdue. I opened it, and there it was, a forwarded thank you letter typed years ago, but never sent my way. A pilot's words, simple, direct. Because of you, I came home. My kids have their father. I've lived a life I wouldn't have had if not for your work. The applause swelled one last time, then softened into a kind of quiet that didn't feel empty. Vernice sat back, glass forgotten in her hand, the stain on her blouse spreading the fabric clinging to her skin. She had nothing left to say, and that was fine. Wyatt gave my shoulder one last squeeze before he sat again, his head high, his eyes meeting mine with something that hadn't been there before, not just love, but respect. Edsel's nod from across the room sealed it, no further words needed. I breathed deep, the air carrying the scent of wax wine and the faint sweetness of flowers past their prime. And for the first time in a long time, the weight I carried didn't feel like it was mine alone. You ever think about teaching that next generation? Amos asked, setting his coffee down on the scarred old table between us. I cradled my own mug, the heat seeping into my palms, and looked out the window where the first light of day spilled across the churchyard. The workshop behind the chapel was still quiet, the doors propped open to let in the spring breeze, heavy with the scent of honeysuckle, sawdust, and oil. On the bench beside me, my badge sat, polished for the first time in longer than I cared to admit. The sunlight hit it just right, sending a soft glint across the floorboards. Funny how something could carry the marks of service and still shine when you bothered to wipe the dust away. I took a slow sip, and let his question sit. I'd thought about it, of course I had. But thinking and doing weren't the same. By mid-morning, the teens began to arrive, 3 boys and 2 girls, all looking equal parts eager and unsure. They shuffled in, eyes wide at the rows of tools, at the smell of grease and wood, at the idea of learning something real with their hands. I set the tone by keeping it simple. Laid out a socket wrench, a ratchet, a couple of battered screwdrivers that had seen more years than any of them. Showed them how to hold each one, how to feel the weight and balance before they ever touched a bolt. You don't fight the tool, I said. You listen to it. They watched at first quiet, but I saw the shift as their fingers wrapped around the handles as they tested their grip. I told them about nights on the flight line, about the sound an engine made when it was almost right, but not quite about how that sound stayed with you, followed you into dreams. One of the girls, tall and sharp-eyed, raised her hand. "What's this for?" she asked, pointing to the badge I'd set on the bench beside the tools. I smiled, touched it lightly. "That's not for me today," I said. "That's for you. So you know I trust you to handle this work right." The light in their faces changed just a little, but enough. We worked through the morning, the scrape of metal files and the soft click of wrenches, filling the space dust motes, swirling in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through the high windows. Outside, birds called to one another, their songs rising above the hum of effort inside. Amos leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching with that quiet pride he carried so well. I caught his eye once, and he nodded, no words needed. As we broke for water, one of the boys' freckled hair too long for his eyes looked at me and said, "Why didn't you brag about this sooner?" His voice wasn't accusing, just curious, like he was trying to understand how someone could keep quiet about things that mattered. I wiped my hands on a rag, felt the grit of the morning's work in my palms, and met his gaze. "Some things are worth waiting for," I said. The room seemed to settle at that, like it understood. And so did I. I ran my thumb along the edge of the badge, feeling the fresh engraving, as if the names had weight, as if each letter pressed into the metal could somehow press into me too. They were just names, 5 in all the workshop's first graduates, etched alongside the year 2023. But to me, they weren't just names. They were proof of something built the right way. Quietly, honestly. The badge gleamed in the soft light of dusk, polished and cared for in a way I hadn't done for years. I turned it over once in my palm, before setting it down on the podium, a borrowed slab of wood, nothing fancy, but sturdy. The kind of thing you could lean on without fear it'd give. Around us, the town festival stretched wide. Smoke from the barbecue pits mingled with the sharp scent of fresh-cut grass. The breeze carried the twang of a fiddle, tuning up the high, sweet laughter of children, chasing one another between tents. People milled about with paper plates piled high, plastic cups in hand, faces warm with the easy joy of a small-town evening. I spotted her at the edge of it all, Vernice standing beneath an old oak half in shadow. She wasn't close enough to hear me, maybe not even close enough to see the engraving, but she was there, watching, just watching. Amos stood nearby, his coffee forgotten on a bench, his hands clasped over his cane. Edsel kept to the back, arms crossed, eyes steady on me, that familiar small nod of his, already waiting. Wyatt hovered at my shoulder, quiet but solid, like a post driven deep into the ground. I cleared my throat, though the words came easier than I expected. This badge has been with me longer than I care to count. It's seen good days and hard ones. It's earned its scratches, and so have I. But today it belongs to all of you. You earned this too. The kids from the workshop, teenagers really. But tonight they looked older. Somehow stood close, their faces open and earnest. The badge's metal clinked as I laid it flat on the podium, a small sound but sure. I'm proud of what you've built here, and I want to help keep you building, so starting tonight we've got a scholarship fund. No speeches, no plaques, no promises we can't keep. Just a hand up when you need it. The clapping came slow at first, like folks weren't sure how loud to be, how much space to give a moment like this. Then it gathered, rolled through the crowd, genuine and full. It wasn't for me. It was for them. Wyatt stepped forward and wrapped me in a hug, the kind that doesn't have to last long to say everything. "Thanks, Dad," he murmured, voice steady in my ear. For all of it, Amos's hand squeezed my shoulder as Wyatt stepped back. His smile was wide, his eyes glinting with a pride I felt in my bones. Edsel gave that nod slow and sure, as if to say, "It's about time." I glanced back to the oak tree, but Vernice was gone. Slipped away without a word, like a breeze that comes and goes without notice, until it's already moved on. I felt no bitterness about that. Some absences speak louder than any speech. The festival hummed around us, the band striking up a tune that fit the night, easy low meant for swaying more than dancing. I stayed for a while, shaking hands, trading quiet words, watching the workshop kids laugh near the food stalls, shoulders lighter than they'd been that morning. When the lights dimmed and folks began to pack up, I gathered the badge thumb, tracing the names one last time. It felt different now, not a reminder of what I'd done, but a promise for what came next. The frame was new, it didn't hang on any wall. It was the lives they'd built, the trust they'd earned, the work done with clean hands and clear hearts. I slipped the badge into my pocket, the metal warm against my palm, and stepped out into the night, the smell of mesquite smoke lingering in the air. The sound of the festival fading behind me. As the last of the festival lights dimmed, I stood alone for a moment, feeling the weight of the badge in my pocket, now engraved with names not my own, but no less part of me. The night air smelled of mesquite and cut grass, and somewhere nearby laughter echoed soft and true. Sometimes what we build quietly says more than any speech ever could. A life's worth isn't in applause or headlines, but in the hands you've lifted, the bridges you've mended. Funny thing is, some frames we spend years chasing were never ours to hang. They were meant to hold others. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story below. Let's swap lessons worth passing on.